Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, so we've been really fortunate to have a number of really important leaders in the state who have been here with us throughout the day, hearing different ideas, presenting different ideas, and there are lots of people that we could hear and should hear from, but we're going to pause right now to focus on two really key leaders in the state. Especially in our state Senate, where a lot of these ideas will be under discussion in the next session, as well as the House and around the state. But I want to take a moment now to thank, well, I'll thank everybody who came shortly, but thank especially Senate President Tim Ashe, and the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate, Chris Bray, for being here today and for their work in the Senate, and invite them up to share some short remarks with you on their reflections about this day and what things look like for them going forward. And then after that, I'll share some brief closing remarks, and then we will have our social hour, and we'll go from there. So thank you, Senator Ashe and Senator Bray.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Jared. And I think many of you who know me know I'm not one who's could be readily accused of being a brown noser. But I would like to say that Jared has been a presence in the Senate Transportation Committee, which I was on for the first time this past year. And I think it's safe to say that Jared's presentation, which was an abridged version of the hour presentation earlier today, was, in my opinion, as someone who's thought about energy issues and climate change for my entire time in the Senate and well before that, was the single best, most coherent, easy to understand explanation of the problem and the types of solutions and scale of action that is required to do something about it. And I think Jared has, at least from my point of view, really been able to communicate about climate change and the actions we need to take more effectively than anybody I've seen. So I just want to thank you, Jared, for doing that. And it's somewhat hard, you know, when Jared asked me to speak, it's hard because I want to react to things that I'm learning and hearing while I'm here, and you can't really prepare for that until you've heard it. So I'm actually really impressed at the array of strategies that have been suggested today. I'm also impressed to know that many of them, we're actually seeing some progress thanks to the people in this room. And I just, a couple examples. Paul Zabriskie, who is kind of the weatherization czar, I'm not supposed to call him out by name, but helped in the Senate make sure we were putting money forward to help get low-income people into highly efficient vehicles. That was an idea planted in our ears by Paul and Sue Minter and their team. And now that's actively being developed, which is something that's really, really positive. Rebecca and her team at Efficiency Vermont were speaking to us, along with Chris and others in the Senate, in the House, back in March, April, May, about rethinking the mission of Efficiency Vermont. We're finally starting to see that movement towards what many people have called an all fuels efficiency utility, which I just think is so transformative the way we think about it. And I think that the presentation that Kristen and Rebecca did is, it's not the beginning of a conversation, it's a midpoint, and I think it holds tremendous progress. Peter from A&R, who I think just stepped out, the conversation about TCI. TCI is something that if you polled 180 legislators back in January, maybe 5 or 10 might have heard of it. And yet it's one of the most powerful tools to reduce transportation emissions that we can possibly do. And I'm very impressed in checking in with Peter at the level of seriousness he takes, both trying to reach an agreement with the other states, but making sure it's the most aggressive possible agreement that can be reached in light of having to work with others. The folks at BED, listening to the presentation they made and understanding the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 system, which outside this room no one understands, but knowing that 3 or 4 years ago when the legislature passed that, we couldn't have imagined the different forms that would take trying to comply with that. And it's exciting to hear the visionary actions that are being proposed by BED and others. And I know the mayor was here, and I've talked to him about that. So from my point of view, I'll say that we in the Senate over the last couple of years have really um, tried to take stock of where we've been and address this issue of a new appreciation for where our biggest emissions problems really come from. And we've retooled our Senate Transportation Committee. Andy Perchlik, who many of you know, our Senate Transportation Committee now is, I think, really trying to be on the vanguard of thinking about climate change as it relates to transportation in a way that was not always the case. Our Natural Resources Committee has always been a leader, as with their House counterparts. And even our Agriculture Committee is talking about climate change through things like forest carbon sequestration. So the breadth of actions that are required to take, as I say, in part because of Jared's really strong communication skills, is something that we really embrace. And I'll just conclude with one thing, and this is as much a challenge to my fellow legislators as it is to the people in the room. And several of the people who made pitches spoke to the need to do this. From my point of view, no successful effort to reach any of these goals, whether it's through a Global Warming Solutions Act, Paris Climate, any of the different strategies that we have, will be successful if people who don't think about climate change all the time don't understand how it's good for them. If low and moderate income people think this is just something for people who can afford Teslas, people who have the money to put solar on their roofs, if they think that way, we will not enlist the type of mass movement that is really required to meet all of these targets. So my belief, and I know that many talk about environmental equity as a consideration in fighting climate change, but I hope we will all really redouble our commitment to making sure that every aspect of our effort has the needs of all people up and down the income spectrum at its heart. There is a reason why people like Donald Trump are capable of almost winning elections or winning elections. And it is because precisely there are many people who don't feel like these policies, which are very good for the environment, have anything to do with them other than increasing their costs. So we have to figure out how to communicate stronger, enlist them, and make sure that they get the financial benefits that are inherent in most of the proposals we heard today. So I look forward to working with all of you moving forward, and I'll pass off to Chris.